Well, here we are, back in the garage. So this must mean it's time for another garage lecture. Garage lectures started under COVID, and they were a fun way to do like TED Talks, only, less professional. And we started with one on mammal skulls and teeth that was given by Professor Hans Larsson. And I also did one on the life of an animal trail based on the camera trap work that we were doing in northern British Columbia. And then we did one on snakes, snake genetics and development and things like that, and anatomy and physiology, that was done with my wife, who has owls, which would involve going out in the winter and talking about different kind of owls and showing you some of their morphology and some of their feather properties and things like that. And also I had one on the life, sex and death of Pacific salmon at my cabin in British Columbia. Now this is the next one. It's about a year later or so, and it's going to be on beavers. Right outside the door we have a beaver who lives in our canal. Now, this beaver has been a bit of a pain in some ways because he's been cutting down our hedge. And I've tried to get video of him cutting down our hedge. Now, normally this is an issue, and we actually go to a lot of trouble to make sure the beaver doesn't cut down our trees. But he's cutting down our cedar hedge, which isn't something that people normally worry about for beavers. And yet, that's precisely what he's doing. So, check it out. He's systematically removing our cedar hedge. So here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna put a camera trap and see if we can catch him in the act.
Yeah, this is so cool. There's a fair bit of research on the engineering behind this, because the angle of the upper and lower incisors is so perfect, and they can adjust that with their jaws to keep on sharpening their ever-growing incisors. And engineers have used that angle to construct chisels in the same shape.
So let's see. Oh man, I hope the camera trap got something. Maybe it didn't catch anything. That would suck. That'd be weird. Why wouldn't it get any? I don't know, we'll figure it out. Okay, so in one respect, my attempt to capture the beaver taking out trees was successful, in that he came when the camera trap was here, and the camera trap did take pictures, but for some reason it didn't take pictures of the specific time when the beaver was here. So I repositioned the camera trap, and then I put the stick in front of it that he cut the previous day and got hung up on the fence so he couldn't grab it, so I put it in front as bait. And now it's gone, one day later. So let's go check the camera trap again. Oh, please let him be on there. Frickin' guy, I can't get him on the camera trap, I don't understand. So it's really cold out there right now, to be honest. And that's why I'm bundling up so much. Because we're gonna take a walk down my canal and see if we can see what action is going on with the beaver that's been cutting down our hedge. What do you say we go for it? On the way back, I'll pull out the camera trap, and we'll take a look at it inside to see if we got anything. Okay, so here we have the lodge. So within this lodge, the beavers can stay safe and warmish through heating from their body as well as insulation from the snow all winter long without really having to come out at all. And to facilitate that, they bury a bunch of sticks that are embedded in the ice, but that then project down below the ice. So they can cut them off underneath the ice, drag them back into the lodge, live in the lodge, and hang out warm, eat what they need from the bark of the trees. Now you can see there's a cedar here. That's almost certainly from our cedar hedge right there. So here's a pretty cool thing that I realized about beaver lodges in winter recently. And that is that during the winter, the beavers have to have a vent for their air and for air to come in so that they can have oxygen and get rid of carbon dioxide all winter. So let's take a look now and see if we can see it on this lodge. I really hope we can. Okay, so I'm going up to the top of the lodge and I see what looks like a vent. So you can see crystallized breath of beaver that's coming up through this vent here. So down in there is the breath of the beaver, if you will. I've been able to see and interact with beavers in many different contexts over the years, and sometimes been able to get some really cool footage of them. Indeed, I was taking a little walk on the creek near my cabin, which I wouldn't really expect to have beavers because it's not really dammable. I sort of scared and startled a beaver in this little tiny pool, and then took the opportunity while he was underwater hiding from me to set up a GoPro above where I thought he would pop up, and sure enough, there he is. Sure. So let's get rolling with the next part, which is talking about the anatomy of beaver. For this part of the garage lecture, we're in a different sort of garage, and that's the basement of the Redpath Museum at McGill University, where I'm a professor. And we're here because we have a mounted beaver, which allows me to point out some specific features of beaver anatomy. So perhaps the most obvious thing is the teeth of the beaver. This beaver is missing his skull, so he doesn't actually have his teeth, with these incredible incisors that are constantly growing and constantly sharpening as they basically slice through wood and plants and other things. This guy has some tooth damage on the upper incisors. Yeah, I'm at the Canadian Museum of Nature, and they have an extinct beaver skull right here. Check it out, it's huge. So that's the modern one up there and the extinct one down there. Now it turns out that apparently because of the shape of the incisors, they were unlikely to actually cut trees down like modern beavers. There's no evidence that they built dams or anything like that. They're mostly eating aquatic plants and other things. Look at the size of that thing. So beavers have very, very dense fur because they spend a lot of their time in extremely cold water. And that fur has two main layers, including coarse guard hairs on the outside and finer hairs on the inside. Those fine hairs are so thick and so dense that a beaver can swim for quite some time underwater without even its skin getting wet. And that fur is why beavers have declined in so much of their range, because they were hunted and trapped for the purposes of mainly beaver fur hats, but also for other purposes. Now another cool thing is the webbed feet of the beaver. So in the back, they actually use their feet for paddling, like maybe like a duck would look like. So the webbing between the fingers basically provides a surface that they can push on the water, and they're extremely efficient swimmers. The front paws are not webbed, however, and that's because they use them for very dexterous movements when they're moving around small branches for chewing the bark off the branches, or for grabbing and rolling and moving various aquatic things, or like aquatic plants, or for when they're trying to build their dams by sticking sticks into fine things and carrying mud and things to push basically down onto the dam to make it waterproof. Now the final really funky thing about beaver is its tail, with this sort of flat, leathery, hairless, almost hairless feature that is the function of which has been heavily debated. So it used to be considered underwater to be used as a rudder to basically steer themselves as they swam along with their feet. But underwater recordings showed that in fact their tail will undulate and maybe actually is being used to generate locomotion and forward momentum as well. Then it's been argued that out of the water, the tail is used as a prop. So basically beavers would maybe while they're moving and cutting something and trying to cut down a tree, they use their tail to actually prop themselves against the ground. There were also a series of papers that talked about the tail as a fat storage organ. So when beavers get really fat, their tail will often swell, and most of it is adipose or fatty tissue with connective tissue that basically creates a matrix in which that fat is stored. Also, it's been shown that the tail can be used for getting rid of excess heat. So beavers have such good insulation that if the air temperature is 20 degrees or higher, then they basically overheat out of water. But if they can keep their tail in the water, they will lose water through their tail, and they can actually stay out of the water in temperatures that are up to 25 degrees Celsius because they're shedding heat in their tail. If you come upon beavers that aren't habituated to people, all of a sudden you'll start hearing bangs on the water as they slap their tail and alert other beaver. This is not a particularly good mount of a beaver, but it's the one that we have handy to show you. Looks kind of badass from this angle.
Beavers use all these amazing things to build one of nature's wonders, and that is this incredible dam where they block off the water, live behind it in a lodge, and dramatically modify the landscape around them. One of the cool things about these dams is that they interact with many other organisms that need to move through the rivers, with salmon being an example. A number of years ago, I made a video about coho salmon in this area of my cabin trying to surmount a series of beaver dam difficulties. So I filmed a whole series of things where you have these little tiny dams, and then they sort of just kind of check it out and eventually hop over the top of it without too much effort. So here's one that's just kind of nosing its way up into the stream and then moving up above it. Dams like this have essentially no negative impact on salmon attempting to migrate upstream. Moreover, the juvenile coho salmon actually really like these habitats because they like slow water, marshy, side water kind of habitats. And so in reality, beavers, although they were historically thought to be kind of bad for salmon, are actually really, really good for salmon overall. Now you might think that as the dam gets bigger, that this really will be a severe barrier to salmon. So here's one that's just slightly bigger in a different creek nearby, with the water flowing over it in high water. So the salmon want to get up above so they can breed up there, and then their their young can rear in the beaver pond. Now, dams like this, depending on how much water's below it, actually can be kind of hard for salmon to sometimes navigate. And so here are a whole bunch of videos of salmon jumping up and hitting logs and sticks and really just generally not being very successful. This one did it, of course, but then kind of got stuck in between, and I was feeling guilty. Tried to put him up above, but he ended up going down below. Of course, he jumped up again successfully a bit later, and so here's a video of a successful navigation of this particular barrier. And in fact, these kind of barriers, the vast majority of salmon can eventually get over them because they wait down below until the water levels rise, and then they can navigate the barrier without too much difficulty. But what about larger barriers, such as that one that we were walking over earlier? In this case, they can really indeed be a barrier to salmon for much of the year, but the salmon will wait until high water, so they'll congregate below and just wait until the water gets high. And then, as long as they jump at just the right moment or swim in just the right speed, at least the largest and most powerful salmon can make it over. So here's a slow motion version of a salmon that's just swimming right up the fast part of the current and into the stream up above.
Now the beaver dam has broken through, and so it's not holding back water, but you can see the remnants of the effects it has wrought by killing all of the low-lying trees and originally impounding huge amounts of water. So beavers change nutrient dynamics of the soil, of the streams, they change hydrological flow patterns, they create habitats that weren't there previously, mainly these large impoundments that are still shallow in most cases, and they used to completely structure all of the North American hemisphere, all of the North American continent. Now they're called an ecosystem engineer because they basically redesign physically the landscape in a way that engineers an entirely new type of habitat. You might also call them a foundation species because foundation species are things that create physical habitat structure for other organisms. For example, really large trees, but clearly beavers do that as well. And they're a keystone species, at least locally, because the effects that they have as an individual are much bigger than that of most other organisms. So the effects that beavers have on the environment are much greater than would be expected based on their abundance. That is, they're not that abundant, but they have massive effects. So beavers build huge dams and lodges and make ponds and stuff, right? Well, it's certainly true, but beavers also live in places where they don't build dams or big lodges, and that's rivers. And so in the main river here, there's no way to dam it, and yet there's lots of beavers in it. We see them every year. And they still knock down big trees to get the food. Wow. This big cottonwood is not long for this world. The beavers have been so active. Check that out. And it goes all the way around. So the tree's dead for sure. Just a matter of time till it falls. I don't know, man. Not a good idea.
Beavers do knock down these big trees and take the branches and stash them and then eat the bark off them, nibble the bark off the branches and even the bark off larger trees. But a lot of the time they actually just forage on the leaves themselves or even in this case the vines of some native North American grapes, where they use their dexterous front paws to sort of roll the leaves around and then swallow them. So this is actually our backyard beaver, the same one I went looking for earlier and I've been trying to get on my camera trap. And I think it's kind of cool here to watch how he just manually moves the branches, the little branches, slowly into his mouth, and you can see it's kind of like a little conveyor belt of destruction for plant life.
One of the nastiest plants is devil's club. It has these really sharp spikes with little barbs on them that makes it hard to pull them out. You can have them in your hand for a year after. But look at this. A beaver has actually been chewing off and eating these devil's club. We were joking that this beaver is going to be really disappointed later. Or that he's playing a trick on one of his neighbors. Try out these fresh greens. Okay, so now we're going to go back and see if the beavers have been captured on my camera trap. So let's take this puppy inside and see if we got anything. It said there was a couple new videos on it, but my guess is that most of those are squirrels or things like that. But let's have a look, you never know. And we can also look through some of the ones that were recorded a bit earlier too. So maybe we'll have some luck there. So it looks like it stopped recording in the middle of winter or at the beginning when it got really cold. And probably because there were just no animals. I saw no tracks in the snow there. So let's hope for the best here and see what happens. Okay, so raccoon on January 1st. Squirrel. 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 You can see where the beavers cut down things here. But it happened mostly when I wasn't looking. Cat. Yes, I really am wearing snowshoes in my backyard. Unnecessary perhaps, but fun.